Hey everybody, Coach Toolshed here, and in today's video, we're going to be discussing something that is becoming more and more obvious as the days go on, and indeed, several different news items happened just here in the last couple of weeks that have pointed in one single direction, but the industry seems like they're not really picking up on things, even though so many of these AAA publishers keep going down the same tracks and ending up in the same location, and they're not really learning lessons from each other. But what's happening here is we're seeing the ultimate demise, and like I said, several different things are pointing to this recently. We're seeing the demise of a certain genre of gaming, and it's a genre that the AAA industry was heavily relying upon here in the current generation. And as we move into next generation, I'd be interested to see if they learn their lesson and sort of move away from what they've been doing. But I don't think it's going to happen because, like I said, they're just not understanding. But in fact, the genre I'm talking about is the so-called looter shooter genre. You know, the games where they have a finite set of content and they expect you to just keep running the same missions over and over again, hoping that you get a better drop from the boss the next time through, hoping that you get the rolls that you need to complete your build, and if you don't get it, you'll just keep running it again and again. These sort of games where people put hundreds and thousands of hours into just hoping that they can get the gear drops that they want. These addicted little treadmill games that become a second part-time job, especially games like Destiny and such. That's the sort of game that I'm talking about. And why am I saying that these games are failing? Because certainly several of these have sold several million copies and they've produced a lot of revenue. But along with that revenue, they've produced a few other things, such as bad reputations, and in fact, not just bad reputations, but formerly sterling reputations being driven into the mud here in the last generation. Talking about companies like BioWare, Bethesda, Bungie to a certain extent, and others. Something else that gets produced amongst the development teams who make these games is, by and large, a sense of creative burnout. And I'm not talking about crunch per se. I'm talking about when you have the same team of hundreds of people working on these projects for 3, 4, 5, in the case of Anthem, 6 maybe years of development time on the same project before the game even launches, and then after the game launches, those same people got to keep working and coming up with new, try to make fresh content, fix the problems with the game. And so you're asking people to be working on these games for so many years. At a certain point, the creative juices are just going to stop flowing, and that's what we see time and time again. Look at the expansion ideas we've seen from some of the bigger names over the last year. Destiny, you know, they're running out of ideas. That's obvious, and we're going to get into some of that in just a little bit. But what was one of their big ideas recently? Oh, let's go back to the moon. You know, back from the last game. And now we're seeing the Division doing the same thing. You know, they're trying to get players back because Washington, D.C. just wasn't cutting it in the Division 2. So, hey, let's go back to New York. You know, they're just retreading ideas. And yeah, they're generating some hype among the hardcore player base, and they're luring in some people who dropped off, who might have been around for the last game. Yeah, they're getting some notoriety for that, but that's not going to last. Those people aren't going to stick around. Only the hardcore stick around. And yeah, while we're talking about the subject, it's important to note that all of these games do have their hardcore following, some more than others, but all of them do have some sort of following. But the fact remains is that when you look at all of them with a broader eye, the problem is when people get involved in these communities, they get so narrowly focused because you can't dedicate time to more than one of these games because they're like a part-time job. Some of them are like a full-time job. You got to put 20, 40 hours a week into some of these games just to keep up with them. You can't play more than 1 or 2 of these games. So the people in these communities, they get so laser-focused and they don't see that the same problems keep repeating themselves throughout all of the games. And it's not until you back away and you stop playing all of the games altogether that you actually see that the same bullet point issues are happening with every single one of these major AAA releases that go into the looter shooter genre. And what we're seeing is that the cycles aren't working. They used to work, but they're not working now. Because what's the cycle we see with about 90% of these looter shooter games? Well, first, we get the false hype cycle, which happens before we even start seeing trailers. We see the developers running out and telling us that the game's going to be the next Bob Dylan, or it's going to be, you know, akin to, it's going to be video games version of Star Wars. You know, we hear all this nonsense, and then we get all the false hype and the false promises in the trailers that show stuff that actually isn't in the game, and they get us all hyped for products that don't actually exist yet, like we saw with the case of Anthem. And see, the false hype cycle has stopped working because we have had some games announced in the looter shooter genre coming out in 2020, and guess what? No one cares. No one's talking about them. They try. They've been trying to jam the trailers down our throat, and if anyone was going to be talking about them, now's the time because there's no other games to distract you. There's no games been coming out in the last couple months. So these trailers and these announcements that have been coming out for some of these looter shooter games that are coming out in 2020, no one really cares because we've learned at this point, as a collective, as a group of players, that these games are just false hype. So you got to wait for the finished product, and then what happens? We get these beta periods, and the betas are just broken beyond belief. And for many years, you would have people trying to defend it, and some people still do, but by and large, this excuse has fallen by the wayside because it's just been exposed as a joke. But you would have people sitting there saying, oh, it's just a beta, don't worry about it, guys, don't worry about it. It'll be better when the game launches. And after time, we've realized that that's almost never the case. If the game is broken in beta, it's going to be broken at launch because the beta periods... It's just a marketing ploy, and that has become apparent to many of us over the years. So these broken betas don't work anymore. And then when the games launch, and they launch with very little content, they try to give us these roadmaps now. And the roadmaps for a while worked. People were like, oh guys, don't worry, there's a roadmap. Guys, stop whining, stop complaining. They're working on it. There's a roadmap. But thanks to, again, a game like Anthem, and even platforms like the Epic Game Store we saw over the last year. When these companies put their roadmaps out, don't pay attention to it. Just don't pay attention to it. Don't even think that it's going to get delayed, because what we're seeing now is they're just completely canceling the roadmaps. A year will go by, you won't hear anything, and they'll just be like, oh, guys, yeah, by the way, this isn't happening. Like, just recently, I think it was a week ago, we saw this happen with Ubisoft, with their last Ghost Recon game, where they all of a sudden was like, oh yeah, that update that was supposed to come out that was going to change the game. In fact, yeah, that's getting delayed. We'll see when that actually comes out. And what happened when Bethesda last year announced, oh, we got this game-changing update. It's coming out in the fall. And then when did it actually come out? Well, it's actually still not out. You have still more than a month to go with that. But they're going to be trickling out information through the media and trying to get you hyped. And they're going to be allowing a certain select few of positive channels to play the game early so you get hyped for it, because that's all part of the game. Because these companies know that there is one last line of defense that they have. Sure, all these other marketing ploys that they've tried over the years that have proven to be lies, they don't really work so much anymore on the broader audience because we've learned, and these games are starting to fail. But what does still work is the so-called redemption arc, because the media will still push it, and a good segment of the player base will push it. And more here on YouTube, I hear people pushing the excuses. So these companies know that they can still rely on a little bit of goodwill and their friends, the influencers and the media types, to push this narrative out into the gaming public that, yeah, we're going to be able to turn our game around. I mean, look what No Man's Sky did. And we're going to be discussing what I like to call the No Man's Sky paradox in an upcoming video, so I'm not going to get bogged down with that right now. But needless to say, this is the last line of defense that these companies have. But what's been going on? Well, just like I said, these news items that have happened in the last couple of weeks, you had Anthem. Well, we got to go back to the drawing board. We're finally going to put in the time that we need. The 6-7 years that we already had to work on the game clearly weren't enough. But we're going to go back to the drawing board and work on this. And like I said earlier, you got The Division. Ubisoft, massive, has apparently run out of ideas, so now they got to hightail it back to New York to try to draw on the player base, because in the last year they took a game that launched with a decent amount of goodwill and quickly ran into the ground by not listening to anything that the public said. Nothing that the player base said mattered to Massive over the last year. And as a result, they had a huge exodus away from the Division 2 among some of the core players that stuck with the Division 1 for years. And Ubisoft trying to lure some of those people back in by retreading the same ideas. And again, sticking with Ubisoft, what did we see? We saw Ghost Recon Breaking Point, where they have to totally scrap what they're doing. They're going to redo the game. Oh, it's going to be so immersive. They're going to redo the loot system. It's just going to be great. Ubisoft fully admitting in a financial report late last year, that those two games did not meet expectations, and of course they're going to now say that they're going to rethink all of their franchises. That's what they've been saying, but I highly doubt Ubisoft is really going to do much besides tweak a couple of things, and we're going to see the same nonsense coming out from them in a couple of years. Get ready for the Division 3 in 2022 with probably all the same problems that these last couple games have had, and none of the actual fixes, because again, these companies can't seem to learn anything from one another. And what else did we see? Well, just about a week ago again, Bungie came out and admitted that, their seasonal look hasn't really been working for them, because now they got to go back to the drawing board and rethink how they release content. And what's funny is, a lot of these games, the problems with these games, they get blamed on the publishers. And for many years, that has been the rule. Oh, don't blame Bethesda Game Studios, blame Bethesda Softworks. Don't blame BioWare, blame EA. Don't blame Bungie, blame Activision. But then what's happened? Well, it's been now over a year since Bungie split from Activision, and what's happened? Well, they moved to a free-to-play model with seasonal stuff and started relying more and more on FOMO. And they've even admitted this. So the fear of missing out, they have these timed events where this gear you can only get for a certain amount of time, and Destiny, like I said earlier in the video, I think is the worst offender when it comes to the treadmill-style looter shooter. It truly is a game that you have to dedicate hours every day in just to make any headway, and what they kept doing was coming out with content that was only for a limited time, making people grind the hell out of the game for a couple of weeks just to get this item, and then they yank the item away. And if you wanted any of the, the cosmetic skins or anything, well, open up your wallet. And that's how they were monetizing the game. And people weren't really happy about it. So now they've got to go back to the drawing board. So much for Bungie being the knight in shining armor and getting the IP back and everyone just loving the game again, because over the course of the last year, they soured the community again. Then last week they made an announcement that they're going to start getting rid of people's guns and what they said, shelving legendary weapons. So good luck to them with that. Bungie, even under Activision's leadership, I've been saying this since back in 2014 about Bungie, is that they never knew as a development studio what the hell they were doing with Bungie or with Destiny. And they still don't to this day. It's obvious they still don't. They're still flapping around in the water. And guess what? Out of all the games I've mentioned today, I would say that Destiny is probably the biggest IP out of all of them. But out of all the revenue that it generated, how much money did it actually make? We don't know that for sure. But if it was really a great moneymaker, do you think Activision would have been so quick to let Bungie out of their contract? If it was really raking in the cash? And by the way, not just let Bungie walk away from the IP, but they said, hey, here, take the IP with you. We don't want any more. Activision would never have done that if Destiny was actually as lucrative as some people seem to think that it is. Like I said, difference between revenue and profits. And sometimes along with the revenue, you get all the extra baggage that comes along with it, and maybe it's just not worth it. And Activision certainly seemed to think that it just wasn't worth it. And if a company as greedy as Activision said, we don't want anything to do with this IP anymore, that should tell you that if one of the biggest looter shooter IPs isn't generating enough revenue, then what do you think the rest of them are doing? All these companies tried to get in on this bandwagon. They thought it was the golden goose. All of these major publishers thought that they were going to get a looter shooter game out to just be a perpetual moneymaker. And what have we seen? We've seen, as time has gone on, the quality has gotten even worse over time with the genre as a whole. And over what we see come out in the last year or so, you had Fallout 76 and Anthem, sort of the last gasp. And now, this year, you have Square Enix trying to jump into the genre now. So you're going to have at least 10 different major AAA games by the end of 2020, all vying for attention in the same space of looter games. You got that PS5 game coming that Gearbox is working on. The Godfall. That game, a looter slasher. It's the same type deal. It's a small co-op game where you're going to be killing bosses and getting loot. It's the same genre. The pie only has so many wedges, and most of those wedges are being eaten up. And yet people still trying to think that they're going to get their own slice. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. Like I said at the start of the video, the industry does not seem to understand that they're losing this battle with the looter shooter genres. They're wasting their time. They're burning out what talent there is left at their studios. They're burning out the player base. People are walking away from all... Look at the damage that has been done to BioWare and Bethesda because of the looter shooter genre specifically. Yeah, we can talk about Andromeda not being great. Some people have problems with the older Bethesda games. I get it. But nothing has damaged them like Anthem and Fallout 76 has done, respectively. Not even close. And that is, you can't even argue that. Even the people who are hardcore players for those games can't deny the damage that has been done to the reputations of these companies. And that's going to affect them down the line. And yet they still keep funneling money into these projects. It makes no sense whatsoever. Because it doesn't take much work to look around and see what people are talking about. And guess what? It's not looter shooters. People aren't buzzing about looter shooters anymore. If anything, when we're talking about co-op games, you're talking about more squad-based competitive stuff that is ruling the day. That's what people are buzzing about. And people, what are the games that are upcoming that people are talking about? It's not looter shooters. It's single-player games. Your Final Fantasy VII Remake, Cyberpunk, Last of Us 2. You got, to a lesser extent, Ori and the Will of the Wisps coming out soon, and Neo 2 coming out in a couple of weeks. You have Resident Evil 3 coming out very soon. These are all single-player games. Those are the games that people are talking about and buzzing about for 2020. It's not Godfall. It's not the Avengers. It's not, what was the other, the Outriders. Yeah, that game's sure to do great, Square. Well done. And according to their own plan right now, by the way, this is a fun fact, Square Enix is going to be releasing 2 co-op online games in the same month, in September. So we'll see how that works out for them. The industry just continues to make fools out of themselves. They continue to not... I don't understand why someone like myself, who isn't even in the industry, can see this stuff, see the writing on the wall, and yet these major multi-billion-dollar companies can't piece together the foresight to see that now's the time to move away from looter shooters. It didn't work. And it wasn't because there wasn't a player base. These games generated a huge amount of buzz, especially at the start of the last generation, but they failed to maintain that buzz. They failed to remain highly relevant as time went on. People don't talk about these games anymore like they used to. Think back to 2014. Every article you saw was about Destiny, and that went on for a year or more. Everyone was talking about Destiny, whether they liked it or they hated it. And as time went on, who's still talking about Destiny 2? Nobody. Who's still talking about The Division 2? Nobody. Who's still talking... Borderlands 3 just came out, what, 5 months ago? And who's talking about that besides that guy from Forbes that talks about it every day? Nobody. And Borderlands 3 actually has more content than a couple of these other games combined. And still no one's talking about it. The fact is, all these developers are devoid of ideas. They're all falling back on either seasonal events or stuff like that to try to capture people into coming in and retaining the hardcore audience into buying their cosmetic bundle packs. That's the same thing. When the Wastelanders DLC comes out next month for Fallout 76, it's a free update, but they're going to try to lure in the hardcore by selling 2 separate faction bundles, which, based on the pricing structure that they currently have in the Atomic Shop and looking at what they're going to be selling in these bundles, I imagine they're probably going to cost about $40 at least for these bundles. And that's where these companies think they're going to make their money, because they have no real ideas left. They're all creatively devoid. Bungie just keeps reskinning the same weapons for the last 7 years. That's what they've been doing. And think about how long the production team has been working at Bungie on Destiny. Years before 2014, obviously, because that's when the game launched. So they've been working on the game for the better part of a decade. You think that they have any creative juices flowing? No, that's why you see them floundering in the wind trying to come up with new ideas. It's just not going to happen. Guys, developers, you have to stop hanging on to this idea that the looter shooters are going to be your saving grace financially. It's just a headache for your studios. You're treading water, you're putting in way too much hassle and effort into something which is eventually, for most of these games, going to end up failing. Anyway, that's it from me, Coach Toolshed. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Please subscribe. If you want to stay in tune with the channel, head forward, and as always, keep it turned to 11.